The mansion sparkled like a jewel against the dark winter night, its windows glowing with warm light, reflecting the flicker of countless Christmas candles. Every corner was decorated with festive cheer, garlands of pine, shimmering ornaments, and twinkling fairy lights that danced across polished floors. A massive Christmas tree dominated the grand hall, its branches heavy with baubles, ribbons, and sparkling tinsel. The aroma of roasted meats, baked pastries, and sweet desserts filled the air, blending with the faint scent of fresh pine from the tree. Guests mingled, laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the halls, oblivious to the cold world outside. At the center of this opulent scene stood the Mafia boss, a man whose mere presence demanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his dark eyes scanned the room with an intensity that silenced casual chatter. People moved carefully around him, aware that his temper was as sharp as his power was vast. He commanded respect without a word, and fear followed his steps quietly like a shadow. Tonight, though, even his usual calm seemed strained as he oversaw the final preparations for the Christmas feast. Outside, snow fell relentlessly, coating the mansion's expansive gardens in white. The cold bit at the windows, frosting the edges with intricate patterns. Inside, the warmth was comforting, yet the contrast made the winter air feel even harsher. That's when a subtle realization struck me. The maid, usually bustling with energy, was nowhere to be seen. Plates were ready, drinks poured, but she had vanished without a trace. A faint scraping sound from the snowy courtyard drew my attention. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it became unmistakable, a soft, desperate tapping, muffled by snow. Heart-pounding, I approached the window, and my breath caught in my throat. There she was, shivering violently, her thin uniform no match for the freezing night. Her small body trembled as she crouched in the snow, eyes wide and pleading, utterly alone. The room's warmth and cheer seemed cruelly distant now, and in that instant, I knew the night would change forever. She hadn't always been like this, trembling in the snow outside the mansion, barely able to stand. Life had been a constant battle for her, a series of unkind lessons in hardship and endurance. She grew up in a small, crumbling house at the edge of the city, where warmth was a luxury and food was never guaranteed. Every day had demanded work, every hour spent proving she was strong enough to survive. Sometimes she went without meals so her younger siblings could eat, and often she was beaten or scolded for mistakes she didn't fully understand. Yet through all the pain, she carried herself with quiet dignity, never letting the world see the fear that lived in the corners of her heart. Her work at the mansion had offered a fragile reprieve, a chance to feel useful, to be needed. She was meticulous in every task, loyal to a fault, performing duties without complaint or expectation of praise. But that loyalty now had led her into danger. Earlier that evening, she had been asked to deliver a small note to a distant relative, someone who rarely visited. She had hurried through the snow, icy winds slicing at her face, her shoes wet and inadequate for the weather. Or perhaps it had been a mistake, an accidental lockout while trying to fetch something for the dinner, a misstep that left her vulnerable to the bitter night. Either way, she had ended up stranded, shivering, with each gust of wind searing her frozen skin. Her teeth chattered violently as she crouched low, trying in vain to conserve warmth, but the cold seemed endless. Snow clung to her hair and soaked through her thin uniform, each movement sending tremors of pain through her body. Her eyes, wide with fear, scanned the illuminated mansion windows for help, but the distance seemed cruelly impossible. Her exhaustion was visible in the way she struggled to lift her arms, her fingers stiff and numb. She whispered soft prayers to herself, words no one would ever hear, hoping someone, anyone, would notice before it was too late. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, a race against the freezing night. She was unnoticed, undervalued, and fragile in a world that had already tested her limits far too many times. And yet, her loyalty remained unbroken. Her small act of duty, her care for those inside, had led her to this perilous moment, making the urgency of her rescue all the more immediate and heart-wrenching. The moment he saw her, something inside the Mafia boss snapped. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, widened in disbelief. His chest heaved as fury replaced shock, a storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. How could anyone, allow this to happen on his property, in his home, under his watch? The thought ignited a fire within him, one that demanded immediate and visible expression. He strode across the grand hall, his footsteps heavy, echoing like a drumbeat of warning. Staff and family froze, sensing the shift in atmosphere before they even realized the cause. He began pacing back and forth, the tailored suit doing nothing to hide the tension in his broad shoulders. His hands clenched and unclenched, jaw tight, and every step carried a sharp intensity that made the chandeliers sway ever so slightly. Words burst from him, sharp and raw, cutting through the previously cheerful air of the mansion. "How could this happen?" he shouted, his voice reverberating against the walls. "Who was responsible? Who allowed this to happen in my house?" His anger was not mere theatrics. It was real, deep, and terrifying, a storm that had been building for reasons the staff had only glimpsed. Objects nearby, a small decorative vase, a crystal candle holder, trembled under the force of his rage. He slammed his fist against the counter, sending papers fluttering to the floor. Staff flinched, heartbeats quickening, afraid to breathe too loudly. His usually controlled demeanor was gone, replaced by raw, unpredictable fury that made even the most seasoned associates step back in caution. His family, used to his calm and measured presence, watched in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the man they knew with the hurricane before them. Every glance he cast carried sharp accusation. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the warmth of Christmas had been replaced by the chill of his wrath. Even the walls seemed to tremble under his energy. The audience watching this scene would feel the unpredictability of his anger, the sense that at any moment, it could escalate further. His rage was a storm with no immediate end, a violent expression of the pride, authority, and protection he felt for his home and the people within it. And in that moment, everyone realized, crossing him, or failing to protect those under his roof, was a risk that could ignite consequences beyond imagination. Without a word of hesitation, the boss barked orders that cut through the tense air like a blade. "Bring her inside now. Blankets, hot drinks, anything to warm her up. Check her pulse, make sure she's breathing." The staff scattered immediately, moving with a frantic urgency they had never seen before. Servants dashed across the marble floors, weaving between startled guests, clutching thick blankets and steaming cups of tea. The clatter of hurried footsteps, the rustle of fabric, and the occasional murmur of worry filled the grand hall. Every second felt like a lifetime, the urgency pressing down on everyone as if the mansion itself were holding its breath. They reached the maid quickly, her small form trembling violently in the snow. Her uniform was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, and her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She tried to lift her arms as they wrapped her in blankets, but her limbs were stiff, numb from the cold. A servant handed her a warm drink, and she sipped weakly, shivering with each swallow. Tears streaked her frost-bitten cheeks, and her lips quivered as she whispered incoherent words, trying to explain how she had ended up outside. The boss stepped forward, his rage momentarily softened by concern. He knelt beside her, checking her hands and shoulders, brushing snow from her hair. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying a weight of reassurance that startled her. He held her gaze, ensuring she understood that she was no longer alone, that her suffering had been noticed. For the first time, amidst the chaos and fear, a fragile connection began to form between them. Beneath the fury and the storm of anger, compassion showed through, an acknowledgement of her bravery, her loyalty, and the danger she had faced. In that moment, the boundaries between master and servant blurred, replaced by something deeper, respect, care, and a silent promise that she would never be overlooked again. As the warmth from the blankets began to seep into her frozen body, her story unfolded silently in his mind, like fragments of a life the world had never truly seen. She had not always been just a maid in this grand mansion. She had been a survivor from the harshest corners of the city, where hunger gnawed at her bones and danger lurked in every shadow. From the youngest age, she had learned to fight for every scrap of safety and sustenance, to endure blows and insults without flinching, and to navigate a world that seemed determined to break her spirit. She had carried the weight of her family's survival on her small shoulders, sacrificing comfort, food, and even her own dreams to ensure others could live. Within the mansion, she had done far more than anyone knew. Tasks that went unnoticed, errands that no one thought to assign, and dangers that she faced quietly, all of it had been done with unwavering loyalty. Once, the house had faced a threat from a rival gang. While everyone slept safely inside, She had slipped through the shadows, warning the guards and moving unseen, helping to protect the family's wealth and security. Another time, she had taken responsibility for a mistake she hadn't made, shielding a junior servant from punishment, knowing that the consequences could have been severe. Every act had been quiet, unacknowledged, yet life-saving in its own way. As he looked at her shivering figure, he felt a mix of awe and guilt. How had he overlooked her so completely? How had someone so loyal, brave, and vital to the household been left to suffer in the snow? The injustice of it struck him hard. He realized that her courage had always been silent, her contributions hidden behind humility and fear of drawing attention. She had worked tirelessly, not for recognition or reward, but out of devotion, and she had been almost invisible in a world that measured worth only by status and wealth. And then he thought of her life outside the mansion, the dangers she had faced even before stepping into these halls. Poverty, hunger, abuse, and constant struggle had left her vulnerable, yet she had never allowed her hardships to interfere with her duties. She had endured, survived, and sacrificed, often without thanks or acknowledgement. The full weight of her silent courage, her resilience, and her hidden sacrifices pressed upon him, and for the first time he understood. The girl in the snow was not just a servant, she was a protector, a fighter, a living testament to loyalty and strength. And the shame of leaving her to freeze burned hotter than any rage he had ever known. The boss's voice rang through the mansion like thunder, summoning every family member, advisor, and staff member to the grand hall. No one dared to resist or delay. The sound of his commands left no room for argument. People hurried, eyes wide with fear and anticipation, sensing that the fury they had glimpsed earlier had not dissipated, it had only grown sharper. As they assembled, a tense silence fell over the room, punctuated only by the soft whimpers of servants who knew that a storm was about to descend. He began by addressing the staff, his gaze cutting through each person like a knife. "Explain to me how this happened," he demanded, his voice low but charged with a dangerous intensity. "How was she left outside, freezing in the snow, while we celebrated inside?" The staff shifted uncomfortably, some stammering, others glancing at colleagues for support. Excuses poured out. Miscommunication, forgetfulness, human error, but none carried weight against the raw anger in his eyes. Each word seemed to make the room smaller, the air heavier, and his rage more palpable. Family members, who had always taken his authority for granted, now stood in stunned silence. They had been accustomed to his control and composure, his quiet calculation, but this was different. The incident had pierced the carefully maintained illusion of safety and hierarchy, leaving them shocked and unnerved. Whispers passed between them, but none dared speak out, knowing that the consequences could be severe. He didn't just scold, he tore into the negligence with precise and cutting words, making it clear that loyalty and vigilance were not optional. Every misstep, every lapse of responsibility was laid bare. The maid watched silently from the side, shivering slightly but maintaining composure, her loyalty unshaken despite the chaos around her. Her quiet presence contrasted sharply with the fear and fluster of those being berated, highlighting her strength and dedication. Finally, the consequences were made clear. Some staff received stern warnings, their pride broken but their lives intact. Others were reassigned or punished for carelessness. The family learned that even privilege and proximity to power could not shield them from accountability. The maid, though silent, had been vindicated by her courage and loyalty, while the negligent were reminded that failure to protect the vulnerable carried consequences as real and harsh as the winter cold itself. The storm of anger that had consumed him slowly began to ebb as he turned his full attention to her. The maid, still wrapped in thick blankets, trembling from cold and exhaustion, looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, his usual commanding presence softened by genuine concern. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low but steady. "I will make sure nothing like this ever happens to you again." Those words, simple yet powerful, carried more weight than any reprimand or punishment ever could. In that moment, she understood that she was finally seen. Not as a servant, not as invisible, but as someone valued, protected, and respected. Tears began to streak her cheeks, but they were no longer from fear. They were from relief and overwhelming gratitude. She whispered her thanks, barely able to form the words, and for the first time felt that her loyalty, her sacrifices, and her endurance had been recognized. He nodded, accepting her thanks but also understanding that it was he who owed her more than words could convey. As he watched her, the boss reflected on his own responsibilities. Not just as a leader, but as a human being. He had allowed anger, pride, and neglect to blind him to the quiet courage around him. Loyalty, compassion, and the well-being of those who served him were as important as any power or wealth he commanded. The lessons settled deep within him, shifting something fundamental about the way he would view those in his care from that day forward. To honor her, he took symbolic actions: a promotion, ensuring she had security and respect within the household, and gifts that spoke not just of material value, but of acknowledgement and gratitude. The atmosphere between them changed subtly but irrevocably. A bond had formed, built on trust, recognition, and shared understanding. For the first time, the maid looked at him not just as a fearsome master, but as a protector and ally. And he, in turn, saw her courage, resilience, and loyalty as a mirror of the values he had long overlooked. In that quiet, transformative moment, the mansion no longer felt like a house of power alone. It became a place where respect, gratitude, and human connection truly mattered. As the night settled over the mansion, the warmth inside seemed deeper, richer, carrying with it a lesson that would not be forgotten. The Mafia boss, once consumed by rage, now felt a profound shift within himself. He realized that wealth, power, and fear were nothing compared to the quiet strength of loyalty, the unseen sacrifices that shaped lives in ways no one noticed until it was almost too late. The maid's courage, her unwavering devotion, and her willingness to endure hardship for the sake of others had opened his eyes to a truth he had long ignored. True value is measured not by status or recognition, but by heart and integrity. Her life, once invisible, had been transformed in an instant. She was no longer just a servant who worked quietly in the background. She was acknowledged, protected, and honored. Her loyalty and bravery had been seen, and her worth finally recognized in a way that ensured she would never again be overlooked or dismissed. Gifts, promotion, and the promise of safety were tangible expressions of that recognition, but more importantly, respect and gratitude now formed the foundation of her relationship with the boss. As he watched her smile, a rare softness touched his eyes. He understood that human worth cannot be measured by appearances, that kindness and courage often dwell where least expected. And in the stillness of the mansion, with snow falling gently outside, he whispered to himself, and perhaps to her as well, "Some hearts shine brightest in the coldest nights." The words lingered, a quiet, tear-triggering testament to loyalty, love, and the unseen sacrifices that change lives forever.